Discovered my dog's cancer wasn't operable, and now I'm torn between waiting for him to suffer or setting a countdown for euthanasia. I, male 22, have had my dog for over 10 years. His name is Soz. Yes, Soz, for real. That was his name when we rescued him from a shelter at 2 to 3 years old. He's a Kelpie/Blue Heeler Australian cattle dog. He's the first and only dog I've ever had. He's such a handsome boy, with a wonderful smile that everyone comments on. He has big pointy ears that stick up like those on Batman's cowl, earning him the nickname Bat Dog, amongst a myriad of other nicknames he answers to. Despite his ethnic background as a cattle dog, he's the world's biggest sook. If someone broke in, he'd roll over onto his side and hope for tummy rubs. He's always been energetic, wanting to play with bigger dogs well into his older age. Even after 2 back leg reconstructions, he never stopped wanting to run, even as he began to pant more and more as the years went by. A fortnight ago he got sick suddenly. We took him to a vet and discovered he had a UTI, urinary tract infection. He's on antibiotics now that have fixed the UTI, but this prompted the question of what had caused it. A scan revealed a mass in his abdomen. The vet told us that it was possible that something had calcified in his stomach and it had become infected, and that would be an easy fix. It was not. It's cancer on his liver, and it's inoperable. It's not a matter of if we put him down, but when. As a family, we're still deciding whether to wait until the first sign of suffering to take him to the vets, or to set a fixed date. I don't feel comfortable putting him down when he still seems happy, but my father is concerned that he may deteriorate extremely suddenly and he will suffer before we can get him to a vet. He's suggesting a week from now. I don't think it's all fully registered yet. I got the news less than an hour ago. I'm going to spend the remainder of the time with him giving him treats and cuddles, and having my friends who've known him for years come over to see him one last time. But I'm afraid that even after all that, I won't be ready, and it will all hit me as we're taking him to the vets, and I won't be able to let him go. I won't be ready to let them take him away from me. I know there's nothing that anyone can do to fix this, but I hope someone who's been through this before can give me some advice on how to cope with this. Update 1. I'm sorry I did not respond to you, as all of my emotional and mental energy was spent holding myself together and spending time with my beautiful boy. I know that this is an extremely long post. But I just need to get everything out of my head, and there's a lot in there. If you haven't seen my original post, it will be the first post under this one on my profile. I've edited and added more backstory to this post, as it's turned from just an update for readers of my original post, into an all-encompassing post for readers new and old. We rescued Soz from the pound when he was 2 to 3. Yes, my dog's name was Soz. That's the name he had when we rescued him, and this was 2010-2011, so Soz wasn't shorthand for sorry yet. The staff there said he was 3, but we suspect he was 2 as his paws continued to grow for a little longer. He was a Kelpie crossed with a Blue Heeler Australian cattle dog. He had been dumped in a country town, and he'd been picked up after being found begging for food. He'd been transferred to the pound just outside of the city. I was 10 or 11, and my family had decided to finally get a dog after a long time of asking. My twin brother, my dad, and I went to the pound, and had a look at the dogs there. Dad wanted a dog that already had some training, and was well behaved. We walked down the row of enclosures, and he approached each dog. He simply gave them a look and held up a finger. They either ignored him, hid from him in the corner, or were completely nuts. It was a confronting thing as a child, seeing dogs that were either terrified of everything all of the time, or just completely insane. But we finally came to him. Dad gave him a look, and held up his finger. And Soz just trotted over and sat down in front of us. Dad has always had a love of Kelpies and cattle dogs, especially native ones, so I think there was a little bit of love at first sight. We took him into one of the play pens to get to know him, and he was fantastic. So friendly and playful, but gentle and careful. By the end of our visit, we had our hearts set on him. Mum took some more convincing. She was afraid he had a bit of Rottweiler in him. But after visiting him herself, she fell in love. For over 10 years we had him, and he was with me from when I was a child, still in primary school, through all my high school and university dramas. He was the best dog I could have ever asked for. Playful, polite, friendly, handsome, and adorable. Answering to a number of nicknames throughout. Soz, Sozzle, Sozzle Dog, Dog, Doggo, Dog Dog, Dog-a-Log, Chapo, Mr. Chapo, Young Chapo, just to name a few. As he got older, he began to slow down. That's something we expected. Then, one night a week before Christmas, he was running a fever and very uncomfortable. He wouldn't settle down, and drank a lot of water. The next day, they took him to the vet. They diagnosed he had a UTI, and gave him antibiotics to treat it. So, crisis averted, he didn't have a Delphi kidney failure or something that was going to kill him. But this did prompt the question of what had caused it. They did a scan and found a mass in his torso. It was concerning, but the vets told us that it could very well be nothing to worry about. The explanation they gave was that sometimes dogs eat things they shouldn't, and in order to protect itself the body forms a calcified layer around it in their gut, and that calcified mass can become infected. That's an easy fix and nothing to worry about. But they'd do another scan to be sure. It wasn't a calcified mass. It was terminal liver cancer. I found out on the morning of Shortly after writing my original post, I got in my car and just completely broke down for about 30 seconds. For context, before So's cancer, I'd cried twice in the past 5 years. I don't cry. I pulled myself together and drove off to go to the things I needed to do that day. The first song that came on the radio was I Can't Live With or Without You by U2, followed by Stayin' Alive by the Bee Gees. Just my luck. I had work that afternoon/evening, and I work in a liquor store. We were flat out busy from before I got there, right up until our closing time late at night. Between how busy I was, and how fresh the news was, I didn't even have time to think about it. Then I had a party I was supposed to go to at my partner's house. I didn't tell my partner or any of my friends, because I didn't want to take away from their enjoyment. It wasn't an easy night, and not one I would describe as fun, but I did manage to hold it together. The next morning, on Jan 1st, myself, my partner, and 2 other friends who had stayed over, spent the day at the beach. It was a really nice day, when I didn't think about So's. That night I broke the news to my partner. We were both very upset and we cried into each other's arms. On Monday I followed one Redditor's advice and bought So's a Big Mac, and a quarter pounder for myself. He sniffed the Big Mac and decided he didn't like it, and then sniffity burger and decided he did like that, so he has my burger and I had his. I had to break it up into chunks for him, although he gave fitting the entire melted cheese-covered beef patty into his mouth at once his best effort. He didn't like the pickles, so I picked them off for him. That night my partner came to stay over. She has known him for a few years now and wanted to spend some time with him. On Tuesday morning my dad informed me that So's was booked in for his final appointment on Friday morning. I felt that this was too soon as it had cut his prognosis down from 1 to 2 weeks to 6 days, and meant that now I only had 3 days left with him. Furthermore, it felt like jumping the gun because he still seemed really good. My partner and I took So's for a walk around a lake in our local national park, and she took photos and videos of us together that I will always hold dear, and look at once I'm ready. Afterwards we went to a local cafe where I bought So's a breakfast burger all for himself, which he ate most of. When I dropped my partner home, she turned to the back seat and cheerfully said bye-bye So's, which struck me as unfitting. I think I realized that it hadn't quite hit her. And So simply said, I guess this is the last time you'll see him. I could see it suddenly hit her, and she got out of the car so she could go into the back seat and cuddle him. It was a difficult drive home, because saying that to her also made it hit me again. It was a finality, crossing off this is the last time he'll ever see partner's name again. I spoke with my dad when I got home. I voiced how I felt regarding the date of So's final appointment. He understood how I felt, but explained some things to me that I didn't know or understand. The prognosis of 1 to 2 weeks simply referred to when the cancer was likely to kill him, but before then, he would lose his ability to walk, eat, drink, or even stand up. Things that would have indicated and caused great suffering and pain, but also caused great emotional and mental distress for So's. Furthermore, many of the complications of the cancer would likely kill him at around that same point, in ways that would have been deeply distressing and painful for him. Ultimately we were in a race against time against all of the sufferings that the cancer could inflict before it killed him, and all of the catastrophic complications that could kill him even sooner, even more brutally. Our local vet, who had been caring for him for years and had been with us through this diagnosis, would not be open on weekends. If we didn't go on Friday, and something were to happen over the weekend, we would either have to hold out until Monday, prolonging his suffering, or take him to a 24/7 vet that he was unfamiliar with, who likely would not be able to give him the passing that was best for him. This would also apply if something didn't happen over the weekend, but happened late at night or in the early hours of the morning. By that point, not only would his passing be more upsetting, but we would have been unable to save him from immense suffering. So while it was hard, I accepted that sooner was better, to avoid a catastrophe. He hugged me and I just completely broke down again. He started crying too, which was really hard to watch because I can count only 3 times in my life I have seen my father cry. The cruelest things about cancer is, apart from the cancer he was in very good condition. Vets who didn't know him didn't believe us when we told him how old he was. If not for the cancer, he could have gone on for another 12 to 18 months and had a fantastic quality of life right up until the end, as opposed to slowly declining and or continuing on when his body was giving out from old age or other illness. Cancer doesn't just kill. It slowly saps their strength and health in the days and weeks leading up to it. It was hard watching So's become more and more tired, and watching him want to spend more time lying down, and watch him struggle more to get up, and seeing him not want to get and move, and it needing to take more convincing to do so. The motivation was there, he still wanted to, but he was just so tired and began to get weaker. It was a constant in our last few days, between his bursts of energy. My partner texted me to tell me that she had compartmentalized So's diagnosis and it was only really just hitting her after I said to her, I guess this is the last time you'll ever see him. She asked if she could come over again to spend more time with him. So that night she stayed over again. He cuddled between us on the couch while we watched a sitcom, and he was spoiled in pats and cuddles and snuggles. The next morning my partner and I walked So's along the beach. I asked my twin brother if he'd like to come, and he said yes. When we were almost there, however, I realized that he had forgotten to lock the house up behind us as we left. My parents were at work. So we had to go back and lock the doors. However, when we got there, he decided he wanted to stay home, so it was just my partner and I. We walked So's down the beach to a cafe my family used to go to when I was a child, which we hadn't been to in years. I ordered So's a toasted egg and bacon sandwich. Later, my best friend of 15 plus years came over to see him. We talked a lot, and took him for a walk together, and took him into our local dog park. I remember all throughout his life he would run around with other dogs. But now he just meandered around, saying hello to the other dogs but not bouncing around with them. I cried in the shower that night. We considered pushing back his date to Monday, as he seemed really well. On Thursday morning, my mum came in and sat down at the end of my bed. She told me that So struggled a bit to stand up, and then walked outside and simply stood there and stared off into the distance instead of wandering around sniffing and peeing. It was her belief that Friday was the right time, and I found myself unable to disagree with her. My mum, brother and I walked So's through our national park again, and then went to a nearby cafe. So's is half of a giant sausage roll, and a little bit of my pancakes. A few hours later my mum and I took So's to our local hardware store while she did some shopping for her gardening projects. When we got home, the neighbor came jogging over because he wanted to say goodbye to So's. He'd owned a border collie called Zen. Zen and So's were around the same age, and Zen had passed away last year from the same liver cancer So's now had. The two had been friends the entire time that we had So's. I was surprised at how upset he was, but in hindsight I realized that through the friendship between So's and Zen, my neighbor came to know So's. But more importantly, So's was such a big part of Zen's life, and So's was a connection that my neighbor still had to Zen even after Zen was gone. My ex-girlfriend, who I'm still friends with, came over to see him one last time. From the moment she came in she was upset. Being on the spectrum, animals mean too much to her, and losing pets hits extremely close to her. She loved So's so much. Although we were still friends after her and I split up, she had only come over to my house and seen So's a few times in the 3 years since. 3 years today, actually. I will always regret not having her over more, so she could have spent more time with him. After she left, my partner came over for dinner, and I took some Polaroid photos of So's. It was only when he was diagnosed that I realized I'd never taken any of him. Every time I ever or a microwaves frozen pie for lunch, I would give So's half of the roof of the pie and a quarter of the shell. So that night, I have him a whole meat pie to himself for dinner. After dinner, my partner, my brother, and I took him for one last evening walk. After that, all of us, excluding my brother, sat on the couch in armchairs watching Beverly Hills Cop on Netflix. I had hoped that I could have so snuggled between my partner and I on the couch one last time, but he was just too tired and so just lay at my feet. Over the last week he'd become more and more tired, and it had been hard to watch. It was hard to accept that it was our last chance to cuddle on the couch, and he just couldn't do it. My partner was upset saying goodbye one last time, and on the drive home from here after dropping her home, I sobbed the entire way. Early Friday morning, we all woke up and took So's for one last walk. Dad always gave So's some of his honey toast for breakfast, as it was one of his favorite things in the whole side world, so today Dad gave So's a whole piece to himself. We went to our local dog park, and he mustered all of his remaining strength. He played with the other dogs, ran around, played tag with my mother, played tug of war with him father, and chased after his squeaky toy. We then went to a local cafe where we all shared a big slice of apple and sultana cake, including with him. After, we walked back to the oval at the end of our street and he ran around there some more. I'm so glad that we were able to take him to the dog park one last time, and he was able to have the strength to play and have fun one more time. Usually, walking him takes us past the dog park, and he can see all the other dogs running around in there and he wants to go in. But almost every time I told him no Sazi, not this time, next time, I'm sorry doggy. Given his age and 2 back leg reconstructions, I was always afraid of him hurting himself when turning sharply while running or playing with other dogs, which was a big part of why I was afraid of letting him play in the dog parks like he did when he was younger. But I'm so thankful that I was able to at least in part keep my promise. I was so afraid he'd pass with me breaking my promise to him, because there never would have been a next time. We went on one last car ride to the vet's together. We put the center armrest down in the back seat, so he could lie on the floor of the boot, we have an SUV, and stick his head through into the back seat like he did when he was young. At 9:17 a.m., we arrived at our local vet clinic, who had been seeing So's for years, and were with us through every step of the end, from diagnosing and treating his initial infection, to finding the cancer that has caused it. Mom walked him around the small parking lot for a few minutes, letting him sniff all of the bushes. At 9:20 a.m. we went inside, and were welcomed into a small room. The lights were off, with just a single large candle burning on the vet's desk. A large blanket lay on the floor in the middle of the room, with lots of soft padding underneath. The vet walked us through what was going to happen, and gave So's a Freddo Frog chocolate. While in the past we'd shared food with him that sometimes had a little bit of chocolate in it, we'd obviously never given him a whole chocolate to himself. We never even gave him dog chocolate. He liked it a lot. She took him out of the room to put an 4 into his front paw and give him some sedatives to calm him. When he came back, he wanted to sniff all around the room, even behind the chairs my brother and I were sitting on, up against the wall. I don't think the sedative slowed him down much, as it took a while to get him to lie down on the blanket. But I don't think he would have needed them anyway. He'd always loved and trusted our vet, and had always felt safe with her and us. Watching how happy and energetic he was really made me wonder if we were too soon, but I knew deep down that this was the best time, while things were still okay, before we had to rush him to the vet because he was suffering or actively dying in that moment. The entire time he'd been there, he was fed essentially a never-ending supply of beef liver treats, which he happily chewed down. Even until the end, his appetite and love of food was endless. The vet put the syringe into his fore, and slowly pushed it in while we were all patting him and telling him how much we loved him, and how good of a boy he was. At 9:30 a.m. ACST on Friday the 6th of January, Sos closed his eyes and went to sleep for the last time surrounded by all of us. He was lying there, and just slowly lowered his head down onto his paws and closed his eyes. I watched his chest stop rising and falling, and after a moment the vet put a stethoscope against his side. After a moment, she pulled it away and gave us a nod. And he was gone. The vet left us alone to say goodbye. Mum began to panic, and needed to leave the room. She came back to say goodbye a few minutes later once she had calmed down, but she described it as a rising panic of him being gone. The type of response I was afraid I would have. No, bring him back, I'm not ready. We left, one, by a side door outside. Each of us having a chance to say goodbye. I was the last. And I quietly sang to him All My Loving by the Beatles, which my mother had sung to me as a lullaby when I was small, and then We'll Meet Again by Vera Lynn. I kissed him on the head, got up, and walked to the door. I turned back to look at him one last time. He looked like he was just peacefully sleeping. I turned and left. And that was the last time I ever saw him on this earth. After we all got home, Dad took all of So's belongings and put them in his bed, and put the bed on our back veranda. Then we all went out separate ways. Mom and my brother went into the city to a tea shop he had wanted to take her to. Dad went to the pharmacist to get some medication. And that left me alone in the house. The silence and emptiness of that house was agonizing. I knew he was gone. And yet somehow I could not stop my body from walking around the house, checking every spot where he would usually be, and finding it empty. I knew before I turned every corner, and poked my head into every room, that he wouldn't be there, and yet I was powerless not to anyway. I picked up one of his blankets he had left in my room, that Dad had missed. I put my nose to it and smelled it, and just burst into tears. I held my hands to my head, and wailed. Staggering from one doorway to the other, leaning against each one for support as the sounds of my agony reverberated through that wrongly empty house. I didn't want to be with anybody, but I couldn't be alone. I didn't want to go anywhere, but I couldn't stay here. I didn't want to do anything, but I couldn't sit still and do nothing because then all I would do is think about it all. I spent the day with my partner. We just sat on her couch for a while. I was completely tuned out of reality. My brain swinging wildly between TV static and a constant, unending all-consuming stream of thoughts of Sos. I couldn't stay sitting there. So we decided to go out and do something, anything, to distract me from everything. So I sat staring at my phone, mindlessly scrolling across my city on Google Maps, waiting for something to jump out at me. But nothing did. Eventually I said fuck it. And decided to just go to the mall in the city and look at all the shops, and I'd buy everything that I saw that I liked. And I was immediately hit by the voice in my head that said, but nothing you buy can ever fill that hole he's left behind. Thanks brain. We caught the train into the city, alternating between jogging and power walking in order to make it to the station in time. We wandered through the mall, looking at things for both her and I, but ultimately buying nothing. We eventually went to the botanic gardens in our city, and we wandered through. We sat in a little pergola in the garden, and I told her what had happened that morning, with both of us crying throughout. After a few hours, we went back to her place, and spent some time talking on her couch. After the sun set, I decided it was time to go home. I left, and as I walked down her driveway back to my car, the strangest thing happened. Bats. Australian fruit bats. Flying foxes. Hundreds of them, flying over my head in swarms, completely silently. Sos had pointy ears that stood up on his head like the cowl of Batman's hood. It earned him the nickname Bat Dog, along with the other dozen names and terms he answered to. The sun had just set, and so the sky was still orange and pink. There was a gentle cool breeze, and with hundreds of these bats silently flying only 20 meters over me, I was able to turn my head to the sky and say goodbye one last time. Waking up this morning, and knowing that he was gone was hard. It just comes at you in so many ways, it's overwhelming. I'll never wake up to him coming into my room in the morning to harass me to go for a walk. I'll never put my shoes on as he's excitedly watching me with those big beautiful brown eyes. I'll never walk him again. I'll never see him lying or walking around the house or the backyard again. I'll never hear the clitter-clatter of his paws against the floorboards again. I'll never share food with him again. We'll never feed him dinner at the same time as us again, and he'll never come up to us and wait patiently for some of our food anyway again. I'll never say goodnight to him and tuck him into bed again. People will never come over and ask where he is, and excitedly greet him when he appears, and give him pats and rubs and love. He'll never sing happy birthday with us again when we have a birthday here, or call someone to sing it to them over the phone. He'll never be there to greet me when I get home. And then there's the more intimate things that you don't think about at first, but somehow hurt even more. Never seeing him again. Never hearing him again. Never patting him or kissing him or cuddling him or rubbing him again. Never feeling his warmth again, or the feeling of his softness in my arms again. Never feeling the feeling of his fur beneath my fingers again, or his ears. And for the first time in a long time, I'm scared, because I will have to go through every day for the rest of my life with that. And after 10 plus years of having him be such a big part of my life and world and family, I don't know how I'm supposed to go to a life where he's not there. And that doesn't even touch on things like what to do with all of his stuff like his bed and blankets and toys. I came home last night and it was still outside, even when it was dark and cold and windy. I wanted to bring it inside, because it felt wrong. I didn't want his things exposed to the elements like that, and out in the cold. It almost felt like he was out there in the cold, something my mother felt even more strongly and burst into tears over when I asked if we could bring it inside. But she said we couldn't, because the pain of thinking of it all being out there was less than the pain of seeing his empty bed and blankets, sitting there inside where it should be, and him not being in it. This morning, someone dropped something while walking, and it sounded like the clitter-clatter of his paws. Every time I hear someone sigh, it sounds like him. Dad barely held back tears this morning when he made honey toast and realized that Soz wasn't going to be there to have any. I hear Mum crying to herself a lot, when she thinks nobody can hear her. It's going to be so hard and scary living without him, 5 days and 22 hours. That's all the time I had between being told he had terminal cancer, and holding him in my arms for the last time after he had slipped away. 2 days and 23 hours. That's all the time I had between being told when his appointment was, and the last time I would ever see him on earth as I looked back at him one last time as I left the room after he'd passed. It's been 25 hours and 15 minutes since I quietly sung a lullaby to him and kissed his head for the last time. It wasn't enough time for me to be ready, or say goodbye. But deep down I know that no amount of time would have been.